I was driving down the familiar road, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting golden light across the trees lining the street. The sound of the tires humming against the asphalt was almost soothing, a quiet rhythm that matched the steady beat of my heart. I'd had a long day at work, but I wasn't thinking about that now. My mind was focused on one thing: picking up Lily from school. She was the one constant in my life, the one pure thing left between Emily and me. I thought about her little smile, the way she ran to me every afternoon, arms wide open. I had to get through today for her. I had to keep my composure, no matter what was happening in the back of my mind. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen, and it was Emily. Another message, like the dozens she'd sent over the past few hours. I almost didn't want to open it. But curiosity got the better of me, as it often did. I picked it up with a single hand, my eyes quickly scanning the text. It was a simple message, too simple for what I was expecting, but there was something in the tone that made my stomach drop. "Hey, love. I miss you. I can't wait to see you later." I frowned. Emily had been distant lately, and her words felt hollow somehow, like she was trying to convince herself of something she didn't believe. There had been signs, little things I'd pushed aside. The late nights at work. The phone that she always kept face down when I was around. The way she started talking more about her friends than about us. But I told myself it was nothing. I kept reassuring myself that it was nothing. Another message came through. "I'm thinking about you." My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and a shiver ran down my spine. That was it. That was the moment. I don't know what exactly made me check it, but something in me pushed me to go further. I opened the message history. It took a few moments for my eyes to focus. The words on the screen were jumbled at first, as my mind scrambled to make sense of them. It wasn't just a series of texts anymore, it was a whole conversation. From Emily. To someone else. I read the words over and over again, each line sinking deeper into my chest. It wasn't just flirtation, it was the kind of intimacy that made me sick to my stomach. She was talking to someone else the way she used to talk to me, before everything started to fall apart. There were kisses, promises, plans. The kind of things she and I used to share when our marriage was still real. And now, there it was, proof. My hands were shaking. I almost didn't want to believe it, but the words were right there, staring at me. I couldn't escape them. I felt my heart race, my head spinning. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, letting out a guttural sound that escaped my chest before I could stop it. My vision blurred, the tears threatening to spill, but I wouldn't let myself break down like this. I was driving too fast. Too recklessly. The world around me felt distant, unreal, as if it was slipping through my fingers. The next thing I knew, I was heading straight toward a tree. It was like I couldn't stop myself. The car swerved, tires screeching, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I had to get out. Get away from everything. My grip tightened on the wheel, the panic flooding me in waves. I fought for control, forcing the car back into the lane. My breath came in shallow gasps. I could still see the tree looming ahead, just inches from the front of the car. The reality of what I just discovered began to sink in, and I felt nauseous. But I was still driving. Still heading toward Lily's school. I couldn't stop. I couldn't think about anything other than getting to her. I told myself I couldn't let Emily's betrayal ruin my daughter's day. She didn't need to see her father fall apart. Not yet, anyway. The car came to a sudden halt in front of the school, the tires screeching to a stop just in time. I glanced at the clock. Lily's class had just let out. I breathed in deeply, fighting the overwhelming urge to crumble, to let everything go. But I couldn't. Not in front of her. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the school building. The weight of the situation pressed on me, and I could barely breathe. But I had to get out. Had to be strong for Lily. I wasn't ready to face this. I wasn't ready to deal with what Emily had done. But as I looked at the door to the school, I realized I didn't have a choice. Lily was waiting for me. She didn't know. She didn't know any of this. I wiped my face quickly, taking a few steadying breaths. I could do this. I had to. I opened the door, the cool air hitting me as I stepped out of the car. My legs felt unsteady, like they might give out beneath me, but I forced myself to walk. I couldn't let my daughter see me like this. The moment I saw Lily running toward me, a smile on her face, I forgot about everything else. I couldn't let this, whatever this was, touch her. Not yet. She reached me, and without thinking, I knelt down to her level. Her little arms wrapped around my neck, and I hugged her tightly. It was the only thing that felt real in that moment. Her warmth, her innocence. It made everything else fade away, just for a second. But as I pulled away, the realization hit me again, everything was broken. And I didn't know how to fix it. I had to get through the evening. That was all I could focus on. Just one night. I could do that for Lily, at least. I could pretend. At dinner, I kept my head down, shoveling food into my mouth with mechanical precision. Emily was across from me, her usual chatter, light, too light, flowing as if nothing had changed. She asked about my day, and I gave her some standard reply, not wanting to dig into what was swirling in my head. My mind was elsewhere. Always elsewhere. Lily ate quietly, her eyes darting between Emily and me. I could feel her looking at us, trying to gauge if something was wrong. She had always been perceptive, more than I realized. But she was only 8. She didn't need to see us like this. Not yet. As the evening stretched on, the usual routine followed. Lily played in the living room, her laughter ringing through the house, while I and Emily avoided looking at each other. The space between us had never felt so vast. I knew she was aware of the tension, even if she didn't know why it was there. I caught her glancing at me a few times, her expression unreadable. I wondered if she was feeling the same thing I was, that growing distance between us, that silent abyss that neither of us seemed willing to address. I wasn't sure how to handle it, how to approach her about what I knew. What was left to say? She'd already given me her answer, in those texts, in those words that replayed in my head like a constant hum. Once Lily went to bed, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where we usually sat together after she went to sleep. The sound of running water from the sink was oddly soothing, but it didn't drown out the noise in my mind. I should have confronted her already. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to face the reality of it. Not yet. Emily walked into the kitchen, her steps hesitant, like she was unsure of whether to approach me or not. I looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since I'd read the messages. She looked tired, her eyes carrying the same weight they always did when she was trying to hide something. But this time, I saw it. I saw the guilt she couldn't mask, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my gaze. "David," she started, her voice soft, almost too soft. She was trying to reach me, but I couldn't let her. Not yet. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms across my chest. What is it, Emily? She paused, searching for the right words, but I already knew what she was going to say. She didn't even have to speak. The silence between us said more than any words could. I'd read the messages. I knew. I knew everything. She trailed off, her voice trembling. I never wanted this to happen. I never meant for you to find out like this. Her words hit me harder than I expected. They were empty. They felt like a scripted apology she had practiced in front of a mirror. Then what did you expect? I heard myself say, my voice colder than I wanted it to be. What did you think was going to happen when you decided to do this? She winced at my tone but didn't look away. I don't know, David. I don't know. I didn't plan this. It just happened. Just happened? I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't plan this? You didn't plan to have an affair? She shook her head, tears beginning to well in her eyes. I don't know how to explain it. I've been feeling so lost. We've been so distant for so long, and I was lonely. I wasn't thinking straight. Lonely. The word stung. It felt like a slap in the face. I had been there. I had been right there beside her, day in and day out. I thought I was doing everything I could. I thought I was enough. But clearly, I wasn't. And so you thought cheating would fix it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the hurt in my chest threatening to explode. You thought that would make things better? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I really didn't. But it happened, and now I don't know what to do. My mind was racing. I couldn't believe it. I still couldn't fully grasp what had just happened. Emily was sitting right there, apologizing, but all I could feel was a deep, suffocating ache in my chest. For a moment, I felt completely lost. I didn't know what to do next. There were no easy answers. The world seemed to spin on its axis, spinning so fast that I couldn't catch my breath. My marriage was crumbling in front of me, and I had no idea how to fix it. I stood there, staring at her, trying to decide what to do next. I could feel my body tensing, fighting the urge to explode, to say everything that was building up inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I nodded slowly. I need time, I said, my voice hoarse. I don't know what to do with this right now. I need space. She didn't argue. She just stood there, her face a mixture of guilt and resignation. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her, to ask her how she could do this to me, to us. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I felt trapped in this terrible silence, unsure of how to move forward. I'm sorry, David, she whispered again, but I didn't reply. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the kitchen. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know what the next step was. All I knew was that everything was broken. And I wasn't sure I could fix it. I woke up the next morning to the sound of the alarm blaring, its shrill tone cutting through the thick fog in my head. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of what had happened. It felt like a nightmare. A horrible, crushing nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was my reality. My marriage was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. The space beside me was cold. Emily wasn't there. She hadn't been there since last night. She left after our conversation. It was like she couldn't stand the weight of the silence between us any longer. I hadn't stopped her. I hadn't asked her to stay. I wasn't sure what I would have said if I had. I forced myself out of bed, my muscles stiff, my mind numb. I needed to focus. I needed to get through the day for Lily. For her, I could pretend. For her, I could put on a mask, pretend that everything was okay, even though my insides were twisted into knots. I couldn't fall apart, not in front of her. Lily was already up when I walked into the kitchen, sitting at the table, her backpack already by her side, ready for school. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the worry in them. She knew. She had to know. Kids were perceptive, and even though she hadn't said anything, she must have sensed the change in the air. It felt like everything in the house was shifting, and she was caught in the middle of it. "Morning, Daddy," she said softly, her voice tentative, like she wasn't sure how to approach me. She was trying to act normal, but I could tell she wasn't fooled. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile, though it felt like it was made of cardboard. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "Are you and Mommy okay?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, my stomach tightening. She couldn't possibly understand the weight of it, but she could feel the tension, the change. She was too young for this. I didn't know how to answer her. "Yeah, sweetie," I said, my voice shaky. "We're fine. Just a little tired." Lily seemed to accept that, nodding and turning her attention back to her cereal. But I could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. She was too smart for her age. She'd seen something was wrong, and I hated that I couldn't shield her from it. I made breakfast in silence, each movement mechanical. I wasn't thinking about the eggs or the toast or the coffee. I was thinking about Emily, and about what had happened. I was thinking about the messages. The betrayal. How could she do this to me? How could she do this to us? My hands shook slightly as I poured milk into Lily's cereal, and she noticed, her little frown deepening. "Daddy," she said softly, looking up at me. "What's wrong?" I could feel the lump in my throat. She wasn't even asking about me, not really. She was asking about everything that had changed. Everything that had shifted between us. I knew she didn't have the words for it, but she could feel it all the same. "Nothing, Lily," I said quickly, my voice thick. "I'm just a little tired. Don't worry." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press me further. Instead, she ate her cereal quietly, the silence between us stretching out like a chasm I couldn't cross. When it was time to take her to school, I managed to gather myself enough to drive her there. The car ride was a blur, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront Emily, to demand answers, to make her see what she had done to me, to us. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. Lily chatted about her day, the new project at school, her friends. I nodded along, offering the occasional comment. I tried to listen, tried to focus on her, but my thoughts kept circling back to Emily, to the affair, to the betrayal that seemed to be suffocating me. I dropped Lily off at the school gates, and she gave me a tight hug before running off to join her friends. I watched her for a moment, my chest aching. She had no idea what was really happening. She was still innocent, still in that bubble where she believed her family was whole, that everything would be okay. I wished I could keep her in that bubble forever, protect her from the reality that was closing in on us. I couldn't let her see me like this. I couldn't let her know the truth, not yet. I got back in the car and drove aimlessly for a while, unsure of where I was going or what I was doing. I was just moving. Trying to escape my own thoughts, the crushing weight of what I had discovered. I wanted to forget, even if it was just for a few minutes. Eventually, I found myself in front of a coffee shop. I pulled into the parking lot, the engine turning off with a quiet thud. I sat there for a long time, staring at the shop. I didn't feel like going inside, didn't feel like talking to anyone. But I had to do something. I had to keep moving forward, even if it felt like I was sinking into quicksand with every step. I got out of the car and walked inside, the bell above the door jingling softly as I entered. The barista behind the counter smiled at me, and I forced a smile back, though it didn't reach my eyes. I ordered my usual, black coffee, and took a seat by the window, staring out at the world moving on around me. It all seemed so normal, so mundane. People walking by, cars passing. The world hadn't stopped, even though my whole world had shattered. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness of it grounding me, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. To the lies. To the affair. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, staring at it for a long moment. I knew I shouldn't, but I unlocked the screen. And there it was, her message history. I couldn't help myself. I read through it again. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I should have confronted her yesterday. I should have demanded answers, but I hadn't. I wasn't ready. And now, I wasn't sure I ever would be. I don't remember how much time passed before I finally decided to go home. It could have been hours or just a few minutes, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the silence between Emily and me was suffocating. We hadn't talked since the night before, not really. She had left early in the morning to give me space, she said. But all I could do was sit in that silence, trying to ignore the gnawing pain in my chest. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always did, neat, orderly, like everything was fine. But I knew the truth now. I knew everything was broken. The house wasn't home anymore. It was just a place, a building full of memories that no longer felt like mine. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to move, to go inside. I couldn't put this off any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that nothing had happened. Emily had already made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. When I walked through the door, I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch. She looked up when she heard me enter, and for a moment, there was that familiar flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought maybe, just maybe, things would go back to normal. But they wouldn't. Not anymore. David, she said softly, standing up. Her voice was hesitant, like she was afraid of what I was going to say. And she should have been. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, looking at her. She was still beautiful in that moment, but the sight of her only made the ache in my chest worse. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. How could I look at her the same way again? Are we going to talk? She asked, her voice breaking. I could see the tears in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were for me, or for herself, or for the mess we had both made of everything. I nodded slowly. Yeah. We need to talk. We stood there in the silence for a moment longer, neither of us sure of where to start. Finally, I spoke. How long? Her face crumpled, and she let out a shaky breath. It's been a few months, she said quietly. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never meant for any of this. A few months, I repeated, my voice cold. You've been seeing him for months. I never wanted to hurt you, she said again, her voice pleading. I never meant to. But I felt so alone, David. You were always distant, always so caught up in your work, and I didn't know how to get your attention. My jaw clenched. It wasn't an excuse. It didn't justify what she had done. So, you decided to sleep with him? I asked, my voice sharp. You couldn't come to me? You couldn't talk to me about it? I thought I was going to lose you, she said, her tears falling freely now. I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know what else to do. The anger inside me boiled over, and I took a step forward. You don't get to make excuses for this. You don't get to blame me for your mistake. You made a choice, Emily. And now we have to live with the consequences. She looked away, as though she couldn't bear to face me anymore. I'm sorry, she whispered. I truly am. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said, my voice cracking despite myself. But you did. And you can't take that back. We stood there for a long time, the weight of the silence pressing down on us. I felt so much anger, so much hurt, but underneath it all, there was something else, something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was a sense of betrayal, or maybe it was just the crushing weight of knowing that everything I had built had come crumbling down. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily, I said finally. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were true. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Her face crumpled, her shoulders shaking as she let out a sob. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive myself either. I stepped back, feeling the distance between us grow even wider. This wasn't the person I had married. This wasn't the woman I had trusted with my life. But I couldn't ignore what was happening inside me either. I couldn't ignore the way the love we had once shared felt like a distant memory, slipping through my fingers. I need time, I said, my voice firm. I can't make any decisions right now. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand, she said softly. I'll give you the space you need. I turned away, walking toward the door. I couldn't stand to be in this house any longer. I couldn't stand to look at her. It was like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with everything that had happened. I needed air. I needed to get out. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if we could rebuild what we had. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't stay here. Not now. Not like this. I drove aimlessly for a while, not knowing where I was going. The road stretched out in front of me, endless, just like my thoughts. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if Emily and I could ever go back to the way things were. And maybe we weren't supposed to. Maybe what had happened between us was too far gone to fix. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when my world had been shattered. It was time to face the truth. It was time to figure out who I was without her, without this broken version of the life I thought I had. I glanced at the clock. It was almost time to pick up Lily. She didn't know what had happened. She didn't know about the lies, about the betrayal. But I knew that someday, she would. I just didn't know if I was ready to face that either.